I'm not happy.
I don't need Elizabeth Warren or the government giving away my money.
Calling Mike Bloomberg an oligarch has implications in this country that I think are unfair and unreasonable.
I care. That's it.
It makes you think of some rich person who got their money off of oil in Russia, who's taking advantage of a broken and dysfunctional system.
Bernie Sanders saying, the country's corrupt, our system's corrupt. Be careful about that language, Bernie. You know, be careful.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
Around the nation, Waldorf Nation, welcome to the show, everybody. TGIF. Thank goodness it is Friday. So we got a great Friday show for you guys today. We're going to go in depth in some separate issues, but very, very important issues, especially in the topic of racial justice. So we're going to talk about that. But first, we have Rand Paul versus the mob. The best. This is like literally the best conservative cry story I've ever seen. So it'll be fun. So we'll talk about that. Then we got Biden's America. Oh, we got Donald Trump. We got the Trump campaign focusing on Biden's America. What will it look like? Doom and gloom. Doom and gloom. We've got it. We'll talk about that. Then we've got some very disastrous information related to a story on home values, specifically for African Americans. And so that's disastrous. It's a great example of how the system is inherently systemically racist against African Americans. I've got some great stats on that. And by great, I mean disaster. We've got Twitter pulling down fake African American Trump accounts. That's fun. And then finally, we've got a story on police, a new report on how white supremacist groups and racism is ingrained in our police culture. So that's a lot of stuff. A lot of disaster in today's story. But again, we're going to take a hard look at systemic racism in policing in this country after, of course, we make fun of Rand Paul. Because, of course, that's what we got to do. I'm contractually required to make fun of Rand Paul. So I don't know if you know that. That's just it's part of the it's part of the, I'm just kidding. It's not part of the contract. But you know what? I still feel like it should be. It should be. It's a public service to make fun of Rand Paul, especially since I've got problems with Rand Paul. Even though I have before given him credit on some of his legislation that he's introduced, some of his, policies that are more like, hey, anti-spying, like police, no knock raid stuff. I give him credit for that stuff, but Rand Paul is still an insufferable douche and 100% simping for Donald Trump and the Republican establishment. So Rand Paul is trash, and so are his fake principles. I agree with you, chat. So, by the way, hello to YouTube chat. Hello to Facebook chat as well, which seems to be empty. But we don't have a lot of viewers on Facebook yet. So, feel free to chime in. I like to read comments from time to time. Again, I read them from primarily YouTube because that's usually where I, where the most comments come from. So the cat holds the contract. That's a good one. It's a good one. You guys, I know you've been calling for me to put the cat on the air. And normally at about this time, the cat is, he has this, I don't know, there's like an overhang on our stairway, right? And it's just a nice little area. It's a nice little square place. And that's where the cat likes to sleep when I'm working. So he sleeps there, and he's sleeping right there, usually around this time in the show. And so, like, that's why I don't drag him in here and be like, here's my cat. look at my kitty. And so that's unfortunate because I probably would get a lot of super chats. Sad day. All right. Anyway, enough talking about my cat. Let's dive into the show. Oh, actually, you know what? Before we do that, please like and share the stream. Very important that you do so. Fundraiser updates. Unfortunately, no new donors yet. We're still about 20% there. So help us out. Trying to raise $2,500 for a brand new streaming computer that has less problems. I already had problems today with things freezing up. But I also had problems with YouTube being stupid. So we have that. All right. Anyway. That said, now let's do it. Rand Paul. Senator Rand Paul is a little bit scared. He was very scared of the mobs that apparently were coming after him after the RNC. And so he's going to go first on Twitter to proclaim how afraid he was of these protesters. He said, "I just got attacked by an angry mob of over 100, 1 block away from the White House." And then thanked the DC police for, quote, literally saving our lives. Now, later on, he's going to go on Fox and Friends and basically repeat the same thing, sort of. But as you're going to see, he kind of embellishes it just a little bit. Take a look.
But we also saw a mob of about 30 people marching and yelling. They all of a sudden saw me right as we got to the policeman, fortunately, or I don't think we'd have survived. We got to the policeman, and the policeman, I don't think, recognized me. And as they came closer, they were shouting my name, and the crowd doubled to 60. And then it doubled again to 120. And as they were surrounding us, and it got closer and closer, and everybody kept pushing back, the policemen were forming a barricade with their bodies. I whispered to the policeman, "They know who I am. You've got to get reinforcements. It's going to get worse." And they were shouting threats, you know, to us, to kill us, to hurt us. And they were shouting and screaming, and just, it really, these people were unhinged. But I can't tell you how, I'm not sure we would have made it. So as we're walking, sort of surrounded by the police, they're attempting to push the police over to get to me. So at one point, they push a policeman backwards. He stumbles, and he's trying to catch his balance, and I catch the back of his flak jacket to stabilize him and, you know, make sure that he's okay, because he's our defense. I mean, if he's down, the mob's loose on us. And you've seen the pictures of what they do to you. If the police are not there, if you defund the police, if we become Portland, if America becomes Portland, what's going to happen is people are going to be pummeled and kicked in the head and left senseless on the curb. That would have happened to us. I promise you, had we not had the D.C. police to support us, I mean, we are thankful that we have police, and we've got to wake up. We can't have the whole country. We can't have Joe Biden rule the country and have no police. I mean, we can't walk down the street in D.C. safely now.
All right. A few things I got to say about that, right? Again, a little bit of embellishment. They know who I am. They knew who I am. And so they were coming after me. I'm pretty sure a majority of those people were not like, "That's Rand Paul. Get him." No, it's more like, "That guy just came out of watching Donald Trump. Get him." I mean, I guess sort of the same result, but really 120 protesters. Oh, I wouldn't have made it out alive. We can't even walk down the street in DC anymore. You know what? You know what I say to that? Good. I'm glad that corrupt politicians can no longer walk safely down the street in Washington, D.C. Why? It's because you support a regime. Okay, let me rephrase that just a little bit, right? Why? Because black people can't walk safely down the street without getting shot in the back 7 times. Hell, black people can't even sit in their apartment safely or sleep in their apartment safely without people coming in and shooting them to death. Though they can't be stopped by police in their car safely. So you know what? I don't really give a goddamn whether or not Rand Paul can walk down safely. And by the way, he looked pretty freaking safe there. All right. He was surrounded by a wall of cops. And then, there was, in fact, you know what? Let me go to some more video because there's more video of what actually happened, right? And so there's one part where maybe somebody might have been in a little bit of a physical altercation, but really throughout most of the video, it's just people being mean, like verbally to Rand Paul, and then shouting, of course, about Breonna Taylor. So let's go to that video.
What's up, bro? I got you.
All right. So, look, you saw that. Again, there was one part of that where somebody went and pushed that police officer. I'm assuming after he was pushed by the police officer, but I can't confirm that. That's what I think happened. And so that's where it got like, ooh, then he got pushed. That officer got pushed into Paul. Paul caught him because, literally getting pushed into. And so that's what happened. And of course, you saw on Fox News, he was like hyping that up. Oh, yeah, I caught that officer. And then, because he's the only line between us and the mob killing me. My life was in danger. My life was in danger. Was your life really in danger, Rand Paul? I mean, yes, mostly you seem to be surrounded. Yes, there were protesters there. And there's a lot of media there. There's just a lot of people filming with cell phones. So like half of the people that were quote unquote the mob were just like people filming it. Come on, man. Really? Come on. So now look, were there any death threats? I couldn't hear any. It's possible there were probably some. There's a lot of conversation going on. But overall, you could mostly hear people saying, Breonna Taylor, say her name, right? And that makes sense because Breonna Taylor, what happened is, that happened in Kentucky, right? That's Rand Paul's home state. And so, yeah, it's kind of important. Now, to be fair, Rand Paul, he did, introduce the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act, right? That would prohibit federal law enforcement from carrying out warrants until the officer provides notice of his or her authority and purpose. And that's fine. Again, that's one of the things that Rand Paul does. That's actually like, okay, great. That's a good piece of legislation. I support that, right? But then again, also your actions do matter outside of that. And he's been an enabler of President Trump overall. And so, look, here's the thing. Rand Paul, this was a photo op for him. This was a photo op or a way for him to, again, you heard him on Fox News. We can't have Joe Biden take away the police. Joe Biden wants to give more money to the police. I don't know if you know that, right? Joe Biden wants to give more money to the police. And he hired, and I wouldn't say hired, but he picked the top cop as his running mate. I don't think you can get more law and order than that, than having the nominee, the Democratic nominee, be the author of the 94 crime bill. All right. So, like, seriously, they're delusional. If you're talking about how, oh, Joe Biden's, he's going to get rid of the cops. He's going to get rid of the cops. And then everything is going to be like Portland. Oh, my God. No, dude. No, not at all. Not at all. This stinks of a Rand Paul pro-Trump campaign ad. You know it. You know the ones where conservatives, they will like use a black and white filter, put in scary music and say, this is Joe Biden's America, where a senator can't even walk down the street safely anymore. Well, again, the senator has actually enabled Donald Trump quite a bit and is using now, of course, the same kind of fascist rhetoric that we see on that we hear on Tucker Carlson on that show. And so, come on, dude. No. He chose to walk through a group of anti-Trump BLM protesters, knowing that emotions are going to be high. And then, of course, when something does happen, that he could play the victim card. And that's what it is. They're really, really good at that. Really, really good, right? And you understand, too, that crowds are full of human beings, right? That can become irrational and even violent if provoked. I mean, for example, having a bicycle shoved into you. Yeah, they can do that. Or, of course, another thing that could rile up a crowd is constantly having people, you know, in your community shot by police despite being unarmed. I think the only reason for Rand Paul to walk into that crowd is so that he could come out and pretend to fear for his life. He knew exactly what he was doing. And guess what? He got the outcome that what he was looking for. So. All right. Speaking of course, the riots in Portland, we got more stuff on this. The theme of the Republican National Convention this week was the only way that your family is going to be safe from the mobs of violent minorities is to vote for Donald Trump. Because somehow the guy who passed the 94 crime bill and has openly called for more police funding despite 3 months of Black Lives Matter protests and as the top cop is the top of his ticket would somehow also allow mobs of minorities. Okay, great. That's divorced from reality. But I want to give you an example here of some of the fear-mongering that RNC is doing. Recently, the Trump campaign released this video, and I'm going to show you just a little bit part of it, of two women that were talking about how, or the reason that they want to vote for Donald Trump, and it's to avoid, of course, Biden's America.
I've seen a lot of moderates, a lot of people now changing over because of everything that's been happening. This is a taste of Biden's America. I mean, the rioting, the crime, freedom is at stake now. And this is going to be the most important election of our lifetime.
All right. So I show you that little snippet, right? Because that entire video is like 4 minutes of them like filleting Trump. Not in a literal sense, but you get it. And so notice that last scene. Oh man, that looks horrible. Is that happening in Portland? Oh my God. What's going on here? Well, no, it's actually not Portland. It's not even Biden's America. It's not even America, really. So no, one of the fires was Brooklyn, one from Chicago, one from New York. But again, that last one, that's Spain. Specifically Barcelona during protests there. As first reported by Catalonian public broadcaster CCMA and independently verified by BuzzFeed News, one of the four images of protests was filmed in October 2019 in Barcelona, Spain, when protests broke out in the city after Spanish courts sentenced Catalan separatist activists to prison. The image used during the RNC video shows fires burning in the streets. One of those same streets can be seen as being in Barcelona by using Google Street View. Of course, You know why they use that? Because it's scary. It's actually more scary than the reality that's going on here. So now, interestingly enough, and this is fun, BuzzFeed was able to find identical footage on Shutterstock. You know what Shutterstock is, right? It's basically stock images. Okay, in this case, the Barcelona footage used in the RNC segment is described as young rebel riot revolutionary anarchist. So somebody Googled that string of nonsense. And so let me show you, right? So there it is. Young rebel riot revolutionary anarchist stands on trash. I don't, you like I said, you see it right there. Okay, you see it. And you can buy it for a total in HD for only $79. That's wow, what a steal. What a steal. That's great. They're really bad at this. But then again, I don't think they have to be good, because conservatives are just easily scared and they buy anything that they see on the internet. I mean, how many times has a Trump campaign been caught using footage, stock footage, and footage from other countries to be like, this is what Democrats are doing right now in America, except it's not in America. It's just ridiculous. And again, the irony here is that they keep saying that this is Joe Biden's America, when really it's Donald Trump's America. I mean, the whole campaign pitch is basically, hey, look how bad it is now. Wait till Joe Biden gets in office. But here's the thing about that, right? The policies Biden has supported are tough on crime, and as well as pro-drug war. He's still not in favor of legalizing marijuana. And so a lot of that has led us to our current situation with incarceration rates for African Americans that are extremely high. And, you know, as bad as the job Biden did, here comes Donald Trump, triples down on it. And that, again, Donald Trump didn't reschedule marijuana, right? Away from Schedule 1. He didn't do anything about any of that stuff. He didn't do anything about incarceration. No, he said more police, more military, more force. Let's send in the military. Let's clear people out with tear gas. And so let's just take what Biden did and do it, even more extreme. Okay. And so understand, like, we don't have a pro BLM presence in government, and we won't under Joe Biden either. Okay. So now maybe Biden would be willing to work on it, maybe a little bit. I don't know. I would hope so. We'll have to see. But but from Donald Trump, we only have one direction that we're going to go, and that's status quo, right? More protests, more police shootings, and more of of what we have right now. Okay, so in reality, a vote for Donald Trump is a guarantee of more protests, more riots, and maybe even worse. And also, by the way, as BuzzFeed notes, protests being portrayed as cities in chaos are a constant frame from Republicans and the Trump administration, despite those on the ground who are saying that it does not match the reality. While some protesters do vandalize property or set fires, people in Portland, for example, have said that it's basically been law enforcement that has come in and exacerbated conflict. In some instances, violent actions have also been attributed to white supremacists who are attempting to cause more violence. Again, you guys remember when we talked about Umbrella Man, who came in and started just systematically smashing windows for no reason. And there were protesters literally trying to stop him from doing so. And so they asked him, are you a police plant? Are you somebody that's an agitator that's coming in? And they literally tried to fight him. And so that's what's going on here. Okay. And they also said the portrayal of protests as violent have also led to armed counter protesters taking to the streets, which results in numerous clashes. And so you get all this propaganda out there that brings out the white militias. Well, we saw what happened in Kenosha, where a 17-year-old with an illegally obtained firearm, right? Since he's not old enough to be able to use a firearm legally in both Illinois and in Wisconsin, and traveled illegally over state lines with it. And, his mother might also be complicit because she's the one who drove him and his rifle, for him to be in that position to then murder 2 Black Lives Matter protesters. And so not only that, but he fled the state. He also became a fugitive and got arrested for that. And so all of that, by the way, happened under Donald Trump. And so not only that, but you can also add in the fact that right-wing domestic terrorism, which ironically kills a lot of police officers, have happened a lot under Trump as well. And so the fact that they're going with, this is what Biden's America is going to look like. It's going to be riots everywhere. Well, kind of looks like Trump's America right now. So them saying vote for Trump, kind of dumb, kind of sad. Just saying. All right. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a quick break here. We're going to come back with some stats on racism in home ownership. So that's a disastrous story here. We'll talk about that as well as pro-Trump accounts that were fake. And then cops being taken over by white supremacists. How bad is it? Well, we've got some pretty bad details from this. So stay right here. We'll be right back after this break on the Nation.
Tighten up my meat.
Please clap.
Mike Pence.
I like my meat tight.
Welcome back to the show. Around the Nation right here, Waldorf Nation. Jeff Waldorf here with you. All right, so we're going to start out by reading a couple of super chats. So Felicia Alam says, I live in Portland and we have great mass transit, citywide PTO, and decriminalized weed. Aqua Buddha sounds just Jay. I don't know if that got cut off, but yeah, that sounds pretty nice, actually. Sarchek says, what I do not understand is the cops saw him walking around with a long gun, did nothing, let him walk away, blame protesters out past curfew. That's because, no, you have to understand, Sarge. It's because the cops were working with the militias. They were working together. They had a similar goal to stop the protesters no matter what, whether or not they were violent, right? And so that's the thing. The police allowed, actually, they didn't just allow, they corralled the protesters so that they would meet up with the white militia. That's exactly what happened. And so that's what it is. That's what they did. It's easy to understand when you realize that police are white supremacists, or a lot of them are. Okay. Also, blessings from Illinois. Well, thank you, Melissa. I appreciate that. Thank you for watching. All right. Okay, I get it, Felicia. Thank you. Let's see. Patrons, patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, Robin Little, and DJ times 2. Thank you for becoming a patron. That's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf. Channel members, Ether and Kriana Beasley. So thank you. You become a channel member by hitting the join button below. So let's move on here. We got some disastrous stats. All right. Systemic racism continues to be at the forefront of our political conversation today because, look, we've got a lot of protests going on, and that conversation tends to focus on policing and incarceration. However, there are also other ways that systemic racism negatively affects people of color. So now we've long known that there are huge disparities in home ownership, for example, between Black and white Americans. And so let me give you some stats on that are pretty disastrous. Today, the Black-white home ownership gap is around 30% as of 2017. Now, that's actually larger than it was back in 1968. That was before the federal government passed the Fair Housing Act. And so those are really bad numbers. Now, in case you think that this is, of course, simply because of lack of education and effort on the part of African Americans, you would be wrong. Home ownership is actually lower for Black college graduates than for white high school dropouts. So if you have no education other than a high school education, or not even, right? If you didn't even finish high school, you're still more likely to be able to own a home than a Black American who is college educated. That's kind of insane. In fact, according to Urban Institute associate Jung-Hon Choi, who cited data from the 2017 American Community Survey, she said, quote, African Americans with 4-year college degrees have a lower home ownership rate than white Americans without a high school diploma. Although home ownership rates increase as educational attainment increases for both Black and white Americans, white high school dropouts have a home ownership rate of 60.5% compared to 56.4% for Black college graduates. So what's the factor on that? Well, actually has to do a lot with student loans, specifically student loan debt. That's actually grown massively for Black Americans. Now, that demonstrates one thing, right? Actually, two things. For one, student loans, kind of a racket, right? We shouldn't have something like that in this country. It drives up prices of education, and it makes it so that people who graduate are mired in student loan debt. But also demonstrates that Black Americans are working really hard to use education to attain wealth, which is basically still the best way to be able to attain wealth. And yet, they still have a very difficult time catching up to the rest of us. And when they do catch up, there are systemic issues as well. For example, a mixed-race couple in Florida whose home in Jacksonville had initially been valued by an appraiser at about $333,000 $330,000 back in June, said the same residence was valued at more than 40% higher after a second appraisal. So now, why is there such a difference? The first appraisal, $330,000, right, for a home. Now, this is a pretty big, pretty nice home, right? So anybody would be really lucky to live in such a nice area and a nice home. However, the reason that the second appraisal was higher, almost like 40% higher, was that they removed images of Black family members. Now, Abina Horton, who is Black, and her husband, Alex, who was white, opened up about the experience in an interview with the New York Times, several months after Horton's Facebook post detailing the episode went viral. Horton told the paper that she and her husband initially expected the home to be valued at roughly $450,000 when they had met with the appraiser in June. According to the Times, a number of the homes in the area can sell for at least $350,000 and up to $550,000. But at their first appraisal, Horton said her home, which has 4 bedrooms and bathrooms, pretty nice, was valued only at $330,000. The value, Horton said in her Facebook post, was far lower than neighboring home sales with fewer bathrooms, fewer bedrooms, significantly lower square footage, and half the land. So now Horton said she and her husband ordered a second appraisal because they had some ideas about why this happened, right? This time, they removed all pictures of Black relatives as well as the pictures of African-American greats they said they displayed in order to inspire their son. They said they also took down works from authors such as Zora Neale Hurston, Toni Morrison, and instead put up paintings of her white husband and his family. She then took her son for a convenient shopping trip during the appraisal, leaving my white male husband to show the appraiser around alone. The home was then valued at $465,000. Well then, this, I think, is an example of systemic racism and white privilege. I mean, again, here's the thing, right? I know some people froth at the mouth as soon as somebody says white privilege, right? That doesn't mean that if you're white that you can't have a difficult life, that you cannot have a hard life or cannot go through hard times. The only thing that means is that the color of your skin is not a factor in going through those hard times, like when it can be to minorities, okay? And again, the other part of white privilege is being able to get the benefit of the doubt. Now, in case you're not buying it, I've got more statistics. Last year, PayScale analyzed differences in earnings between white men and men of color using data from a sample of 1.8 million employees surveyed between January 2017 and February 2019. Among the findings, Black or African-American men make less than equally qualified white men. So same qualifications, Black men make less money. They are the only racial ethnic group that does not achieve pay parity with white men at some level. Now, the study found that Black men had the largest uncontrolled pay gap relative to white men when comparing the average earnings of Black men and white men in the U.S. On average, Black men earned 87 cents for every dollar a white man earned. Hispanic workers had the next largest gap, earning 91 cents for every dollar earned by white men. And of course, what is an interesting statistic as well is that Asian men actually made like $1.15 comparative to every dollar a white man makes. So that is an interesting thing to point out as well. But as far as Black people are concerned, even if you're equally educated and in the same position and equally qualified, you still make less money. There's also, of course, details on how African-American communities happen to be targets of scammers more often as well. According to the FTC's Consumer Fraud Survey, the African-American community is one of the most vulnerable populations affected by fraud. Moreover, African-American and Latino consumers are more likely to be fraud victims than non-Hispanic whites, according to the survey. And so they're also victims of scammers, different types of fraud. They were redlined. And so there's been a lot of ways that the African-American community has been set back systemically. So now, in her interview with the Times, Horton said her heart kind of broke after the June incident. I know what the issue is, and I knew what we needed to do to fix it, because in the Black community, it's just common knowledge that you take your pictures down when you're selling the house. But I didn't think I had to worry about that with an appraisal. And that complaint, by the way, is one of a number of similar reports the agency told the Times it receives annually. Although neighborhoods in which Horton and her husband resides is predominantly white, a 2018 report by the Brookings Institute also found that devaluation problem in majority Black neighborhoods. Among its findings, the report said it found owner-occupied homes in Black neighborhoods are undervalued by $48,000 per home on average, amounting to $156 billion in cumulative losses. It stated that it also found in the average U.S. metropolitan area, homes in neighborhoods where the share of population is 50% Black are valued at roughly half the price as homes in neighborhoods with no Black residents. And so understand that this is a devaluation of Black people in this country. There are reasons why they are not up to parity with white citizens. And a lot of it is systemic. And the reason that we talk about this and that we have to bring this up is to bring them up to an even playing field. And that's all that we're asking for, just for all of us to start at an even playing field. And we're not. And unfortunately, you do get a lot of pushback from people who think that bringing Black people up to the same level as us will put us behind. Well, hey, look, if you're worried about that, well, then you got your own issues to deal with. If you think that allowing someone to have the same start as you and none of the disadvantages that they traditionally have will put you behind, well, maybe you need to work a little harder. And so that's the problem, okay? And so when we point out the inequities in our society, it's not to try to put them above us. It's to try to bring everyone up to parity so that we all have the same kind of opportunities to succeed. And we are not doing that in this country. All right. Moving on. Social media platform Twitter has confirmed that it has removed several fake spam accounts from alleged African Americans that try to push Black people into abandoning the Democratic Party. So now the company recently removed 2 fake accounts and deleted the accounts of a San Diego man who just spammed the platform with pro-Trump messages. Now the fake accounts were purported to be run by Black people whose viral tweets had actually received tens of thousands of shares, retweets, or likes in the past month. One of the accounts, at Went Dem to Rep, logged over 11,000 retweets on a single tweet that claimed the user was a lifelong Democrat who was pushed to vote Republican by Black Lives Matter. That tweet was posted shortly after the account was created, and so it's a little suspicious when that happens. Now, the Went Dem to Rep account also tagged 2 other accounts in a reply at Peter Gammo and Kron699, which were then suspended at the same time earlier this week. Now, the Twitter spokesman said all 3 accounts were suspended for spam and artificially manipulative behavior. So now, what about these accounts was bad? What warranted their removal, right? Well, apparently, the fake accounts used images of Black men for their profile pictures and had 5 separate posts with at least 10,000 retweets, which tends to indicate some bottish activity. So, for example, the profile picture from Went Dem to Rep was stolen from the Instagram page of Nellis Joustra, a model who worked to get the fake account deleted. Joustra said, "I called my mom and asked her what to do because I was stressing out. The only thing I could do was report the account and tweet some tweets to tell people that I'm not the person who owns the account and they're using me on the profile picture without my consent." So this is part of what conservatives are doing, right? So they create fake accounts, fake bots, use pictures from African Americans to try to convince people to vote for Donald Trump. specifically black people, to vote for Donald Trump, or just to get them to not vote at all, right? It's a little bit of a concerted effort, right? There's some astroturfing going on, okay? So now the other accounts that were busted also had a similar deal. Kron619, which was also suspended for spam, claiming a tweet to be a Dem my whole life before he left the Democrats last month. So now let me show you that tweet here. So probably before I was born, voter fraud right there. There's the allegation. I left the Dem because it's the Dems that are racist and inconsistent. Patriots are the most consistent Americans. And then, of course, implies that Democrats can't be patriotic. Well, that's weird, right? So you saw how many times that was retweeted. Other posts from July implored black and browns and whites to leave the Democratic Party. That got over 6,700 retweets. And another urging blacks and whites to not let the Democrat media and the communist rioters divide us. And that was retweeted a great number of times. Now, that other Twitter account that was tagged was Peter Gammo. Peter Gammo is a Turkish-American man from San Diego. Beyond posting his own tweets, the Kron619 account also repeatedly retweeted Gammo's account. When reached by phone, he said, I didn't know anything about it. I mean, I know the guy who runs the Kron619. I met him on Twitter, but I don't run that account. No. That's not mine. He said he had an idea why his account was deleted, but he would not elaborate. He said he was not connected to either Kron619 or went Dem to Rep. He has 17,000 followers, and his posts most recently focused on pro-Trump messages about the election and video from Black Lives Matter protests. Posts viewed by NBC News from Went Dem to Rep and Kron619 were copied and pasted and separately tweeted hundreds of times by other accounts that were created this month, claiming to be those of African Americans. And so you can see what they're doing here, right? There's a bot farm with lots of copy pasta going on. Okay. And so that, of course, suggests that it's coordinated. Pro-Trump groups, conservatives have been doing this for some time. They employ bot farms and troll farms to use against people like Black Lives Matter. And look, that said, it ain't just Trump supporters that are using it. No, there's a couple of establishment Democrats also that got caught doing this, and yet somehow are still on Twitter, which is amazing. So let me go to that, right? So you guys, I don't know if you're familiar with Sally Albright. So she's a establishment Democrat 101, okay? And she was caught back in 2016 using a network of bots, stealing people's pictures and using them for accounts that would then retweet her messages that were anti-Bernie Sanders, anti-progressive. There was even an expose in Huffington Post about it. And she's not the only one. There's also David Brock. David Brock is a former Republican and a smear merchant that switched over to the Democratic side to become an establishment Democrat, right? He was also caught back again in 2016 spending $1 million on a troll army to go after Bernie Sanders supporters. So understand, right? We've got conservatives everywhere. Conservatives in the Democratic Party, conservatives over in the Republican Party that are using bots and trolls to attack the left. That's a big problem on social media. Okay. And I actually do agree that they should work on stopping that. I mean, it's a good step. There's a lot of issues with, social media, with reporting accounts. And before some idiot comes in and says, well, that's free speech, how dare you remove accounts? Twitter's a private company. Facebook's a private company. They don't have to respect your First Amendment rights because they're not the government. The only way to get by that is actually to nationalize Twitter and Facebook, which is an idea that I'd be open to, so that you can get full protections from being removed by the government. But since we don't have that, it looks like if you violate their terms of service by being racist, misogynistic, or whatever, or running bot networks and faking, not only faking followers, but also just faking other accounts and running them, well, then yeah, your ass is going to get removed. And I don't have any issue with that. And because that's not part of your quote unquote free speech. And so, again, we do need to do something about it. It is a good step removing some of these accounts, but I think that more needs to be done to kind of crack down on these bot networks that will try to influence people in elections. This should be classified as a public utility. Agreed. Of course, good luck getting Twitter and Facebook to agree with that. All right. Eat that. Free speech. Sorry, just had to take out the trash. All right. So let's go to police. Fun times. That's a good point, Natessa. She says, I've noticed everyone is allowed freedom of speech until you start saying Black Lives Matter. Yeah, or hey, protest, right? You're allowed to protest, but not like that. If you do anything about Black Lives Matter. All right. So in the midst of Black Lives Matter protests following the shooting of Jacob Blake in the back about 7 times, the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others, the issue of anti-black bias among police is being brought up. And there's a new report out that seems to justify some of our worst fears about that. So now the Brennan Center for Justice recently released a report on Thursday on the presence of not just implicit bias against African Americans when policing, but explicit bias and racism. So it's not just like, oh, we've got a slight bias against African Americans because we think they're a little bit more prone to crime. But no, it's like, no, we hate African Americans. So now the Brennan Center for fellow and former FBI Special Agent Michael German wrote this in his report. While it is widely acknowledged that racist officers subsist within police departments around the country, federal, state, and local governments are doing far too little to proactively identify them, report their behavior to prosecutors who might unwittingly rely on their testimony in criminal cases, or to protect the diverse communities they are sworn to serve. This is all true. So now you've got racist policing, and it oftentimes gets swept under the rug and completely ignored. Or, of course, you justify with stats like 1350, right? So now, 1350. A lot of right-wingers talk about this, right? So it's basically based on crime stats, right? So now those crime stats, you got to understand that that's a lot, partly at least, a result of socioeconomic factors. You also have the issue of over-policing in minority areas. You also have issues of systemic racism and bias in policing and other things. And so when you actually look at the context, when you actually look at the factors of 1350 and what creates that, well, then it's a lot more easy to understand why this happens in these communities. But going back to the report here, efforts to address systemic and implicit biases in law enforcement are unlikely to be effective in reducing racial disparities in the criminal justice system as long as explicit racism in law enforcement continues to endure. There is ample evidence to demonstrate that it does. And so why? Why is that? How did police get racist? Well, at this point, it's kind of by design. I mean, according to the report hidden by plain sight, police officers with alleged ties to white supremacist groups or far-right militias have been identified in states including Alabama, California, Connecticut, Oregon, Florida, Illinois, Michigan, Texas, Virginia, and Washington. And so, look, a lot of our policing, by the way, is also based off of old slave patrols, which, of course, were trying to reclaim lost property, that property being human beings, African Americans specifically. So now German's report points to evidence that law enforcement agencies have sympathy as a result of all of this for, if not direct ties, to far-right militias and white supremacist groups, And that's, of course, what we've seen in Kenosha. I mean, you guys, I showed you evidence. This is cell phone video of police telling armed white people that they appreciated their presence and then handing them bottled water when they were dealing with protesters. So one of the people in the video, by the way, was Kyle Rittenhouse, the teen that's charged with killing 2 unarmed Black Lives Matter protesters. Then you had Kenosha Police Chief Daniel Miskinis saying this on camera.
Everybody involved was out after the curfew. I'm not going to make a great deal of that, but the point is the curfew's in place to protect. Had persons not been out involved in violation of that, perhaps the situation that unfolded would not have happened. So the last night, a 17-year-old individual from Antioch, Illinois, was involved in the use of firearms to resolve whatever conflict was in place. The result of it was 2 people.
All right, so, hey, protesters, it's your fault. It's your fault 2 of you got murdered. Shouldn't have been there. Okay, but wait a minute here. But what about the white militiamen? Did they not also break curfew? Did Kyle Rittenhouse not also break the law by being a 17-year-old with a long gun illegally? Because you have to be 18, I believe, in Wisconsin to be able to open carry, and 21 in Illinois to be able to possess a firearm. And not only that, but you also went over state lines illegally. Weird. But no, they don't go after that. In fact, they go and give them water and say, I can't believe you're here. We appreciate you so much. Okay. And then not only that, but you also had, and this is a clip from a couple of years ago, 2018, from Kenosha Sheriff David Beth saying this.
Society has to come to a threshold where there's some people that aren't worth saving. We need to build warehouses to put these people into it and lock them away for the rest of their lives. Let's put them in jail. Let's stop them from truly, at least some of these males going out and getting 10 other women pregnant and having small children. Let's put them away. At some point, we have to stop being politically correct. And I don't care what race, I don't care how old they are. If there's a threshold that they cross, these people have to be warehoused. No recreational time in the jails.
So, of course, that's in reference to a group of Black people who stole from a store, shoplifted, right? Throw them away for life because they did some shoplifting. Look, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have some sort of consequences for that, but like shoplifting. And then, of course, getting into an accident, which unfortunately hurt someone else. Again, there needs to be consequences for that. But you want to throw them away for the rest of their lives instead of rehabilitation? I thought that's supposed to be the whole point of the prison system, is to rehabilitate people so they can get back into society and become productive members. But in this case, no, they don't believe in that. No, a lot of these police believe that some people are beyond worth saving, and so therefore should be locked up for the rest of their lives. I don't agree with that. And by the way, that's just in one city. Okay. Now, police in states including California, Oregon, and Illinois are currently being investigated for their alleged connections to far-right groups that oppose the Black Lives Matter movement, with many law enforcement officers engaging in overtly racist activities in public, on social media, or over law enforcement-only communication channels in internet chat rooms. Earlier this year, an officer in Salem, Oregon, was caught on video asking heavily armed white men dressed like militia to step inside a building or sit in their cars while police arrested protesters. The officer said he made the request, quote, so we don't look like we're playing favorites. But you are playing favorites. You're helping them out and saying, oh, look, I know you're out here just like the protesters, right? And they have a, they of course should be able to counter protest if they want. That's an American freedom, right? If you want to show up, you want to counter protest Black Lives Matter, who cares? Oh, but if you're going to get special, special treatment from the police because they agree with you, well, that's a problem. Okay, that's a big problem. Officials in Olympia, Washington also opened an investigation to an officer who posed for a photograph with a heavily armed far-right militia group called the 3% in Washington, allegedly after the officer thanked the group for guarding a shopping center. Again, showing how property is valued more than human lives. So, yeah, I think it's pretty clear that officers have, or I should say police, have been infiltrated by white supremacist groups, and that there are a lot of officers who are at least adjacent to that, right? That are friendly to these people, right? And so understand that makes sense, and it tracks with the history of racism in this country. I mean, for example, members of the Klan were lawyers, doctors, legislators, and so on in the South. Their purpose, by the way, was to intimidate Black people into not exercising their constitutional rights, specifically the one to vote. So they wanted to stop people from voting. And we see that today, by the way. For example, arresting Black people at much higher rates than white people and giving them harsher sentences for similar crimes, including prison time, which in 21 states, if you're a felon, well, you lose your right to vote. That's also why they're criminalizing protests in Tennessee, for example, right? Where, if you protest on public land or you camp on public land during a protest, which Black Lives Matter is doing, well, then, we're going to throw you in prison for 6 years, and then we're going to take away your right to vote. So you can't vote in change. And it's also why same right-wing groups and police send agitators in to stoke violence and do property damage so that then the police themselves can act against it. See, this is why simple reforms, I don't believe, are going to fix the cops. Right down to their DNA, to their origins, there is racism built in. On top of that, right, the Brennan Center, the Brennan Center suggests that in addition to working to end implicit bias in policing, agencies must establish mitigation plans when overt racism is detected in their ranks. And we don't do that. This doesn't happen. Now, what does he mean by mitigation plans? German writes that mitigation plans could include referrals to internal affairs, which I don't know if would be effective, local prosecutors, too much linked to the police, or the DOJ, which is under William Barr, for investigation and prosecution, termination, or other disciplinary action. I just already showed you, some examples, or referred to you some examples of why that approach wouldn't work right now. Because already you have a Justice Department that is adjacent to white supremacy. William Barr is not a friend to Black Lives Matter or any sort of group like that. Okay. Again, internal affairs, we don't know who makes up internal affairs. Might be the best opportunity. But then you have local prosecutors who, again, work with police officers. So they're not going to go against the police. And so none of these things are really going to be all that effective. Now, the report also called on the FBI. Before I do that, some of the, results of doing the first part would to limit assignments to reduce potentially problematic conduct with the public, police retraining, intensified supervision, and auditing. And also then calls on the FBI to determine whether its domestic terrorist investigations involving white supremacists uncover any connections to law enforcement, and whether police officers investigated for civil rights violations have connections to violent white supremacist organizations or their far-right militant groups, have a record of discriminatory behavior, or have a history of posting explicitly racist commentary in public or on social media. He says the most effective way for law enforcement agencies to restore public trust and prevent racism from influencing law enforcement actions is to prohibit individuals who are members of white supremacist groups who have a history of explicitly racist conduct from becoming law enforcement officers in the first place, or from remaining officers once bias is demonstrated. Again, I think we're too far from that. I think at some point, maybe this would have worked. Maybe. But I think it's too far. I think we need to do something more radical. Start by defunding, right? Defunding police and using that money, of course, to solve some of the social ills that actually, start crime. Doesn't mean no police. It means reduced budget for the police so they can learn to work with less and not do all the things right now that police do and do poorly. And also, I think tear it down and start over again. You've got to start over again, fire everybody, do thorough investigations and whether or not these people are members of white supremacist groups. Because if they are, they're not going to take the law fairly. They're not going to, protect the communities that they're supposed to protect, and instead attack, suppress, and exploit those communities of color. And so we need to change that. We need to fix that. And small reforms around the edges. And this, of course, what frustrates me about Joe Biden and the Democrats is that they're never going to do such things, because they're as thin blue line and support the police as anyone else, as anyone on the Republican side. They're just a little less cracking people's heads open. And so there has to be major reforms. And unfortunately, members of both parties right now are not interested in taking charge in these necessary reforms. And so what we're going to do is just get a little bit of change around the edges, and nothing's really going to change for the most part, which should be very, very concerning. All right. That's it. That's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for going around the nation with me today. Please like and share the stream. Torn Tokoroa says, by the way, for Super Chat, 10 women. Why do they think we were able to sleep with every woman we talked to? I can't even get one. Get new material. It's getting lazy. Yeah, look, again, one of the racist tropes, and something that pisses off white people, white racists, I should say, more than anything else, is a black guy getting a white woman. So remember, there was a story happened a long time ago of a boy who was executed for whistling at a white woman. I believe that was Emmett Till. And by the way, that was a lie. He didn't even whistle at her. So, all right. We've got a lot of work if we're actually going to make America live up to its promises of equality and justice. But anyway, again, thank you for the super chats. Thank you for watching Facebook, YouTube as well. Please share, check out the video clips, and most importantly, have a great weekend, and we'll see you all back here on Monday around the nation. Oh, and remember, change begins with you. See you later.
Uh-oh, I'm in trouble.
Please clap.
Wait. You're getting nervous, man. I like my meat tight. Tighten up my meat.
Tolerize it.
You're kicking me out the door. You're kicking me out the door.